Good morning, friends in Parent Tween Connection. Whether you're joining us in our Facebook group or on our LinkedIn page or out on YouTube, welcome to our next interview in our January 2023 roundtable. If we've never met, I'm Clarissa Constantine, and I am the founder of the Parent Tween Connection. And our mission is to create community for all of the adults in the village that it takes to get kids from babyhood to adulthood, whether it's parents, aunts, uncles, grandparents, but especially bringing in professionals like Amy, who her tagline on Instagram, by the way, is Amy says so. And I love it because then, it gives parents the response of like, we need to do this because Amy says so, right?
That's right. That's right. That's right.
So Amy, thank you so much for joining us. I'm glad to have you with me.
Thank you so much for having me, Clarissa. I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. So if you are listening through our Facebook group, or if you're not even in our group yet, search Parent Tween Connection and I will let you in, but you can ask questions of Amy as we go. Now, one of the things I love about Amy, number one, she's super cool. She's down to earth. She has the best sense of humor, but is so down to earth about things. But she specializes in helping families blend.
Right.
Because, really, it almost feels like blended families are more common today than the original marital, parents together all in the same home. So many families are defining family in so many different ways. So I'm curious how you landed there. And then we'll get into how to talk with a suddenly silent and sullen teen.
So, yeah, I'm more than happy to share this story. I landed here because this is my experience. And so I was a stepmom before I was a mom. I fell in love with and married someone who had been divorced before and had children from his previous relationship. That was over 20 years ago. More than 20. So I've been married 20 years. So it's longer than that. I got that funny expression because I was doing the math. Like I tell this story all the time, but I need to update my numbers every once in a while. So I've been married over 20 years. I've been a step parent over 20 years. And we have a total of 4 kids. I have 2 step kids and 2 kids. And so 25 years ago, I wouldn't have been able to say to you, hey, I'm paying attention to what I'm doing because I'm going to help people do this later. But this is my lived experience. And one of the reasons I'm so committed to it and shouting this message from the rooftops is exactly what you just said. The construct of the family, like a blended family or a family with a step parent or multiple parents or 2 houses or whatever it might be. It's really hard to find good data on this because we don't really ask about it. But the data points to the fact that this may be the norm. This may be the majority of American households. And so it's woefully unsupported. And we need more people who are opening the discussion to say, how do we support the parents in these family construct? And the example I always give to this, like to prove my point that it's woefully unsupported, is have you ever seen a supply list for back to school night that has 2 houses on it? How to shop for back to school for a 2-house family? I never have. And that's like a situation that people are going through all the time. How many lunch boxes do you want to have? Because a lot of lunch boxes makes the year easier.
That you make a valid point. I grew up in a home where my parents were still married when I graduated high school. And that's something that never would have struck me as something to consider. And yet, in my experience, like I just had one of my tutoring students this week tell me, oh, I left my stuff over at my other house. Can we change our appointment? Because I don't have my books.
Right. And you're the tutor. You're not because that shows up in school. And I'm going to point this out without making any judgment, right? If you're a teacher who's not ready for that dynamic or an administrator who's not ready for that dynamic, you can draw conclusions that penalize students accidentally.
Yes.
Right.
Absolutely.
And I say that completely without intention, because if you're not ready for that, you won't see it. And so, and you end up with situations where kids can't do things. And you mentioned school books, but it also shows up in this digital world where people only have access to the iPad or the computer at one house, or they're not able to do, because so many school resources these days are now like streaming programs. Like I live in Florida, we do iReady at an elementary level, and then gosh only knows, in the high school level. But those resources, and the parents are all online all the time. And if you've got one house where there's that resource and another house that's not, it compounds, right? It really compounds quickly.
And I'm glad that we took the moment to talk about that, because the topic that you wanted to address for the roundtable today is how to connect with suddenly silent or sullen teens and
Right.
tweens. But I
Right.
wanted to make sure that our audience was clear on the fact that you're not coming from this or coming at this from the perspective of presuming that we're dealing with the original parenting pair, if you will. And
That's
to
right.
be fair, I know some of the folks in Parent Tween Connection have made decisions to become parents independently of being married or having a partner. And I think that we forget
100%.
that that's a completely, I mean, that's a definition of family, right? It can be
That's right.
one parent and a child without ever having had another parent. We have the science to be able to do that today. So,
We have the power.
right.
We have the
And
power.
so I'm thrilled that we can kind of frame this in the perspective of an awareness that families are defined in so many different ways,
Right.
and that just that we have kind of that perspective going into it. So, why is it that we can have a kid go from a, you know, normal, I use that term lightly, clearly with air
Right.
quotes, happy, outgoing, interactive, willing to connect with the family members type of individual to all of a sudden, sup, bruh, and like walking into their room and shutting their door, you know? What's going on there?
I'm not a biologist and I'm not an early childhood specialist. And so the exact reasons why this happens are something that I would just be speculating on. My friend Celia Kibler, she likes to say that aliens come and get your children when they
Right.
enter eighth grade, right? It's probably one of the things that is going on, I think, in my research is that they are this is part of them growing up, right?
Mhm.
And they are becoming more aware of their body that is changing and their personality is changing, and they're just becoming aware of the fact that people see them and it changes the way they present at home. And this is where they start to show up differently with their
Mhm.
friends and at school too. So, one of the things that's really interesting for my story about this, my awareness of this, is that it does tie to when I was a step parent because I
Mhm.
didn't have kids yet and I had a teenage step kid. And my first initial awareness of this was watching the parents interact with this person and looking at them like, why are you continuing to treat this person this way because she is a teenager? And they were really shocked by her behavior. It was a situation that many of us will have
Yeah.
lived through.
Yeah.
She asked her parents to go and hang out with her friends at a time when there was a family event. Like, not a huge family event, like not an anniversary or a wedding, but like a grandparent was coming over. And the parents who lived in different houses, but together were parenting, co parenting, as we call it, were like, no, you need to spend time with the family. And this young adolescent was like, came back with a very strong reaction that her life was over based on this consequence. Her life was ending. They clearly hated her, and she stomped off to be by herself. And her biological parents, my husband and his ex wife, were absolutely stunned by this. They're like, oh my gosh, I don't understand what's happened. Where has my child gone? Why are they behaving this way? This is completely out of control. And I, on the other hand, as someone who had no experience, was looking and I was like, "Oh, I remember what that was like to be 13 and feel like if I didn't go to the mall," right? And it was really interesting how my distance on the situation gave me a perspective that helped me see her in a different light because I
Mhm.
do think, and now I've lived this
Right. With your
with
own
my own
kiddos.
kids, right?
Yeah.
Where I was like, "Wait a minute, you used to really like hanging out with me. What happened?" And I had to like pull myself back and be like, "Ah, please, like, is this really here?" I mean,
Mhm.
this is a thing we make jokes about. This is a thing that is in every sitcom and every teenage movie that is around there. This is not an unusual thing. And
Mhm.
the thing that's so funny though is it smacks us in the face like we're being hit by a 2x4. And the other thing that's really interesting is that as adults, most of us don't like what needs to be done then, right?
Yeah.
Because we have to back off.
Uh-huh.
We have to back off. And, like we have to back off. We have to back off. We
Yeah.
have to back off. Like some kids, I can talk too much. So jump in if I'm just
No, no,
talking too much.
it's fascinating because I too don't have children. So I can relate to
Right.
this as being on the outside. My husband didn't have children in his first marriage either. So neither of us has navigated in direct experience the parent or step parent environment, but we work with kids and we have friends, we're of an age that we have friends who have kids in this teen tween range.
Yes.
And so we see a lot. And to your point of like, you had a different perspective of your stepdaughter, right?
Yes.
You didn't have at that time 13 years of emotional baggage, as it were.
Right. I don't call it baggage, just so we're on the same page. I call it tradition. Like tradition and shared rituals, right? Like I didn't have any shared experience. I didn't have any history. I wasn't treating her like a 5-year-old because I didn't know her when she was a 5-year-old. I met her where she was.
Right.
And I was like, oh, you're 13.
Yep.
It's obnoxious to be 13. And I get that, but you're 13.
Yeah. And I think, thank you for the clarification. As I said it, I'm like, I know this isn't the right word, but I couldn't find a better word immediately. It's still early for me, it feels like today.
But yeah, okay.
The shared experiences, the emotional tradition, but you always or but you never kinds of background, right? You've always been this nice human being, and now you're an alien because the aliens have abducted you and done like the alien implant or whatever in your brain. You know what I mean?
Right.
And I love the fact that you're like, hey, it's normal. This happens.
It is normal. It doesn't happen with all kids, which is really interesting. Like, and it happens at different ages. So it always catches you by surprise. And some teenagers have a very strong family connection and they won't necessarily do this. They're more social. They'll stay out on the couch, and other kids will withdraw and change their habits, and they will crave private time, and they will, pull back. And there is a line, right? Like there is a line where this is problematic. Right. And there is a line where it's normal, and everybody has to figure that out themselves. Right. So I do want to honor that, because it's a funny thing. Like if you look at the list of like, these are the signs of a teenager who's in serious trouble, it is exactly the same as the list of, this is the normal behavior of a teenager. It's exactly the same. It's like, how do I know? I know? And you just kind of like, it's hard. It's not easy. You have to dig in and be like,
what's going on, right?
Yes.
So what might you have advised, with the benefit of hindsight being 2020, from that experience? What might you advise to a family today who has that same kind of a situation where the 13-year-old is like, my life is over. You don't care about me. Like, what she really meant was my social life and my existence in this group is over. Right. But at that age, that might as well be as important as water and oxygen. Let's be clear.
Right. Yeah. If they had the skills and the communication tools, what they would probably be trying to say in an adult way, which they don't, and it's fine, is please don't treat me like the 9-year-old that I was a couple of years ago. Right. And so within that context, if you try your best to give them the responsibility, like the treatment of a young adult, which is still a child, right? It's still a child. So, they think they're going to push the boundary, which is their job, because they're on the trajectory of getting to be an adult. And we, as adults, we like to be able to make our own decisions, and kids are stepping into that when they go through adolescence. So the things that, and I did not learn this like all by myself, like I read a bunch of books and things like that, and it depends on the personality of your kids. But the things that I really recommend for folks are try and meet your kid where they are, right? So as they are presenting themselves to their friends, not to you. Right? Not to you. So like the habit that they liked last week that you know about, or their favorite food that you knew about last week or last year, that's not going to be the thing they want to talk to you about. You have to like be a detective and figure it out. So if they're reading The Habit, which is, I don't know if anybody reads that book anymore, or if they're playing a video game, it's like you have to go in there and do that. One of the kids that went through our house that pulled away, I am not a video game person, and I began to play video games poorly and message that kid through the video game platform just to open up communication, connect with them where they are at that time, if you can, right? That's like one of the really big ones. Another one that's super helpful, and hopefully people will laugh at this, right? Some teenagers who get quiet and pull away and want space are very, very combative with questions. They don't like to be asked questions. Really, really confrontational questions like, what would you like for breakfast? Can be like starting a household war, right? And this is a
Right.
really, really challenging place to be
Mhm.
as an adult in sharing a cohabitation space. To say something really, really aggressive to a teenager and like, good morning. And they respond, bah, rah. And you're like, what happened? Where's the, right? This is like just a this is like a I don't know anything other than try really hard not to ask questions.
Okay.
And you work with kids who are training for college admissions, right? And this is another place where kids sometimes get really question fatigue. It's like if you ask them a question, don't ask them a question that sets them off. So like high school seniors who are applying to colleges do not want adults to ask them, are you how is it going with college applications, right? Everybody is asking that. They're like, stop talking to me about this. If you ask them a question that is not about those things, like,
Mhm.
how was school? Good morning. And just be ready. Like, just be ready for the fact that they have like a very quick trigger with this, and don't take
Mhm.
it personally. Like, if you ask
Right.
a kid, like, what do you want for lunch? And they get confrontational with you, it's not actually you or the question. This is them doing their thing. Just be like, oh, I stepped in that. I don't even know. I'm walking away.
Wow, there's a landmine I didn't know existed, but
Right.
wow, glad I'm still breathing.
Right, exactly. Backing away, maintaining my safe space, retreat.
One of the other things that I've seen be successful is, instead of like, "What do you want for breakfast?" Maybe something like, "Hey, I'm having cereal. Can I pour you a bowl?"
Right. And
You know
that is, yeah, exactly. That we use that with toddlers also all the time. It's like, hey, we're having cereal for breakfast. So, that can definitely work. It's you find your own way and give yourself permission to. The thing is to like feel free to back off, right? Like, so when you're dealing with an adolescent who's gotten quiet and you're pretty sure that they're not really struggling and in trouble, the hard thing to do as an adult is to allow them the space to do it by themselves.
Mhm.
And that's so much easier if you have the distance. So, like a kid that comes to you as an outsider, as a consultant, right? You're meeting them where they are and you're like, hey, you're here to work with me. You've already got this. You trust them with that. When we're in the parent role, we're like so used to being in it with them that
Mhm.
it's a big step. It's a big step to back off. But your kid can make his own breakfast at 13.
Right.
This is not a 4-year-old that can't hold a juice box on their own. And so that is the step. And so like if you step in it, if you step on the landmine, which I've done, gosh, I don't know how
Yeah.
many millions of times, right? When you step on the landmine, it's like retreat and be like, you know what? I know you've got this, right? I know you've got this, and I'm going to back off and let you do that because that's giving them it's like, "Hey, I'm going to let you do this because you're old enough to do this because that's kind of what they want, right? You're old enough to do this.
Mhm.
Retreat into your space, close the door on the messy room unless, you can't take it.
Unless there's like biological hazards in there,
Right, exactly.
like
I mean, there
food
is a
growing.
line. There is a line. I'm gonna admit that there is a line, but if you can stand it, close the door and be like, "Dude, pick up the towels,
Yeah.
please."
Okay. Cool.
Sometime, Yeah.
So clearly, like you've given us some insight about where the step parent can actually be a really valuable asset, as it were, right? A
Right.
really key player in this. Because the other thing that I've seen is for the biological parents, and I'm going to say probably more moms, but I don't know that that's 100%. But I talk to more moms than I talk to dads. They feel like, well, when my kid is doing this, like they don't want me, they don't need me. And it starts to almost like threaten their own identity in
Yeah.
a way, which has to hurt a lot, right?
Yeah, it is an identity shift, right? And the deeper we identify with the job of being a parent, the harder it is to let it go. So it is an identity shift, and there are lots and lots of identity shifts we go through in the course of our
Mhm.
lives, right? And
Yeah.
one of them is, caregiver for a young child to, adult parent of an adult. And that's
Mhm.
a big one. That's a big, 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 big shift. And so, and to be fair, right? There are situations where it's completely different because you do have forever caregivers, right? People who are
Mhm.
parents of children who are not ever going to make that progression. So, and
Right.
I raise that because you want to be thankful. One of the ways to step into this identity shift is to really, really be thankful for the fact that you are a parent of a kid who is growing up to be independent.
Right.
right? Because not everybody gets that.
No,
Not
absolutely.
everybody gets that.
And I know I'm thinking of one member in our group specifically who is very open about raising a kiddo with special needs who
Right.
will always need support.
Exactly.
And she is taking steps. They live in Canada, and so it's a little bit different government support structure. But this kiddo is going to, like, she's trying to set up things now so that, because she recognizes that there will come a time, more than likely, that he outlives her. And so she's
Yeah, it's a
taking
hard process.
those steps to make sure that he
Yeah.
can continue to live with the supports that are necessary.
Yep.
Um, and so I think that's a valid point, and she also has a kiddo who is likely to step out into independence on his own. And the
Yeah.
kids are super close, and the kid who is likely to step into, or, all signs pointing toward independent lifestyle, is
Right.
very close to his brother and is like, "Mom, don't worry, like I'll be here. I'll take care of him," but that's a great point of gratitude, in terms
So
of
point of
helping with
gratitude.
that shift.
And for people who like, so identity shift is a thing that we've studied a lot. It's a thing that we help with, right? There's a
Mhm.
lot of different things that we do, and we don't notice it when other people step us through. So like when we're in a process that's really, really defined, like a graduate program, like, so you are training to do something and you graduate, that's a really, really defined and supervised identity shift. And so we don't notice that it's happening. It's like, here's your diploma. Now we call you this. Congratulations. Now you're a doctor, you're a lawyer, you're a teacher. We do that.
Mhm.
Identity shifts that we navigate by ourselves are tougher. But one of the example we gave where you like, so where one of the places that I learned it was in a training for how to help people who were making that transition for lifestyle where you were going to be you had the potential to be a lifetime caregiver, right? Because
Mhm.
that's a redefinition of what your future will look like. It's like, all right,
Absolutely.
looking at this is a situation I'm in. My life has changed. My future is now going to look at this and letting go of the thing you were before. And that works also in this change of we had a young child and now we have an adolescent who will be an adult.
Mhm.
It's okay, now I have an adolescent. What is really going on? What are they able to do? What is my job today? And what am I letting go of? And I'm letting go of the experience of being a parent of that small child. Right.
Mhm.
And that's not easy. I'm not saying it's
Mhm.
easy, but when you see it, you're like, oh, we're no longer going to the playground 3 times a day. We don't do story time at night with picture books, right? This has shifted. And
Mhm.
what do I look like and what opportunities do I have and how do I want to move
Right.
forward? So it really is an identity shift and it's not necessarily easy, but
Right.
they're
Well,
not going
and
to give us a choice.
no, and with that identity shift, I think I'm gonna perhaps be a little extra explicit, is that it's not only an identity of the role that you play, but it's also an identity or a recognition of the role that you play,
Right.
and how
Yeah.
you show up for them has to be different. You're not going to give a 30-year-old a juice box, right? But a
Right.
13-year-old, it's still as crazy to give a 13-year-old a sippy cup, probably, right? So,
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
so
And as
yeah,
they age, right, as we become adolescents, we choose how much we want to be with our family.
sure.
And when I work with parents who are, and this is accelerated and more defined when you have more than one house where kids are deciding where they're going to be. I think your parents were divorced, right? So you had more than one house?
No, my parents were
Okay.
together, but
Your parents were together, but
yeah,
people who have more than one house. There's a
plenty.
point where the kids start to voice their preferences, right?
Absolutely.
They start to voice their preferences. And that happens in single house families with married parents as well as it does
Yes.
blended families. But that's one reason to really think about how you're showing up and how you're interacting with your teenagers and your adult kids. Because if you continue to treat them like small kids, they may choose to not be with you.
Correct. And I can say from my experience, I think that was part of the challenges that my mom and I faced.
Right.
I don't think she saw this perspective, and I very much was like, "When are you gonna stop treating me like a 2-year-old? When are you gonna stop,
Exactly.
telling me to, like, brush my teeth?" And I can see it now. She's passed on 3 years ago plus now, and I can see it, just with age and my own perspective, that it was the way that she knew to express her love for me, but it didn't fit me
Yeah.
when I was 13.
No, and we do know, right? Like, so there are things we don't want to see our kids repeat or our stepkids repeat the things that we did. So, when you're a teenager who is
Yep.
not fully versed in how much cologne to put on or how often to shower, is stepping into that. We very, very much want to help them, right?
Right.
It's from love. Like, please shower.
Absolutely it is.
Here's the
Yes.
soap. It's absolutely from love, but they are coming from a totally different perspective, and so it's hard to meet it and in the middle, and
Right.
sometimes it'll succeed. Sometimes you can look at them and be like, listen, I know you think you know everything, but if I could please give you this little guidance. And other times they're going to be like, nope, and they got to go out and make their own mistakes, and we just hope that they're the little mistakes and not the big ones.
Right. Right. The thought that comes to my mind, a friend of mine has an eighth grade boy, and among the fun at that age is deodorant and cologne and
Yeah.
such. And
Yes.
he's like, here's the deodorant. If you choose not to wear it, your friends will let you know.
Absolutely. That's the other thing. Like most kids are going to be, they're not living in a bubble and so on and so forth. And a lot of these are shared experiences. So
Sure.
it's there's hopefully somebody else out there that will back us
Sure.
up.
Yeah. Okay. So I know one of the things that you told me you wanted to touch on today that I am super intrigued by, and I think this is going to apply to both biological parents and step parents. What do you do when a friend or a relative who has a little bit more removed from the situation offers feedback that feels invasive?
Okay. So give me like a teacher or somebody would come or a neighbor would come and say,
Yeah.
"Hey, I saw Joey doing
Yeah.
XYZ down the street."
That, or I'm even thinking about it like from the perspective, you mentioned like the step parent can offer a
Yeah.
different perspective on how the parent is engaging,
Yep.
right? What happens when, you know, let's say your mother-in-law comes to you and says, "Well, Amy, you really shouldn't have done that with your stepkids." Oh,
You
was
know,
that a nerve I just found?
mother-in-laws are special, aren't they? I have a delightful mother-in-law. I have a delightful mother-in-law. I absolutely love my mother-in-law. But even still, it is a really, really interesting thing when you get feedback from somebody else. Um, so it totally depends on what it is, right? So if it is completely out of line with your life or your ethics, like if you're in a house where you've got family members or people down the street or whatever who are proposing something like absolutely bonkers, that's like a line. Like, so I have an example. Like, there's a family I work with, and one set of grandparents is a completely different religion than anybody else in the family, and so they will come in and really offer things that don't match anything else. And so those folks they have a boundary. They're like, yeah, we don't talk about that here, right? So that's when right? It's like, hey, whatever our line is, that's thank you, and you've crossed the line. The other, when it's not that, right? When you when okay, so you've got this is a real story from my family. So we have one kid who's going to be an engineer. And my mother-in-law is old school, and math and science are hard, right? So she came in and she's like, wow, math and science are hard. And I had to be like, okay, so you know what? I understand that math and science were really tough for you, but we are not saying it that way with these kids, because we do not, this is the way we're handling this moving forward. And she listened to that, right? She listened to that because it was something that I was aware of. The coaching tip I will give is there's a pause that we use. You know what I mean when I say a pause? It's like when somebody does something and you feel yourself about to fire up, like, how dare you? How could you? Absolutely not. There's that pause that we try to teach people to use, which is really a minute to reflect on what is actually happening, right?
Sure.
If it's your mother-in-law, like, what is she really saying? Like, is she trying to hurt my feelings? Is
Right.
she really what is happening? If it's a stranger who's like presenting something that's like, hey, your kid was scratching letters into the tree or skating across the street where he's not allowed, or, you get the call from school where it's like your kid was a bully, right? And there's that gut check moment where it's like, that can't be my kid. And the pause is where you say, okay, could it be my kid? Right. let me listen and
Right.
find out if it was my kid, right?
Mhm.
Maybe it's not, but the pause is to give you a chance to not fire back until you get another piece of information and
Mhm.
line it up with your pieces. Um, I'll give a funny story about that. When one of our kids who has a food allergy was in elementary school,
Mhm.
so he has an anaphylactic allergy, right? So he has all these guidelines to keep him safe, which include don't touch anybody else's food, right? So I got a call from the school that this kid was engaged, got a detention because they were engaged in a food fight. And so I was listening to the story, and I say, "Hey, you know what? I have some questions." And the counselor's like, and I'm like, "Listen, I'm not saying my kid was not involved, but are you sure that my kid was throwing food? Right? You sure that my kid was reaching over because he took his lunch every single day?" And I was like, "Because that would be not that he doesn't deserve the detention. That would actually be a very, very big step for him. Like that would be there's a lot involved in that decision." And she was like, "Well, we're giving him the detention." I was like, "No, no, I'm not talking about the detention. I totally honor that you're the authority and so on and so forth. I'm trying to figure out if my kid is touching other people's food, right?" And it took a little while, but she finally understood why I was asking. And she said, she was like, "Okay, we have to ask the other kids." Right. And then we went to them and asked. And I happened to be there for that. And they were like, "No, he was only throwing his own food. So he deserved the consequence, right?" He was being a turkey, right? But the
Right.
report I was getting was actually a little bit distorted. And I think that that's a funny story where like somebody was bringing me information and I was like, "Okay, I need more details,"
Sure.
but I'm not resisting your
Sure.
information.
I'm not you were being defensive about it. You were being
Right.
curious about it.
Try to be curious, which can be really hard. Think back to the conversation you had with your friends when you were in your 20s before you had kids, where you're like, "Listen, if my kids ever do this stuff, I need you to tell me." Because
Right?
that's the person you want to channel in this thing. Because
Mhm.
our kids do try things out. Adolescents try things out when we're not around. Your kid doesn't walk in and be like, "You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to try on this racy, funky outfit in front of my parents." They don't do that. They try
Nope.
it at their friend's house. So you will hear it from people who are not inside your family.
Absolutely. Awesome. Okay, so I like to round out our conversations with our roundtable guests by asking which of our foundations of connection resonates most. So if you're not familiar with these friends who are
Right.
listening, the foundations of connection came out of a conversation I had with myself about why a lot of my students would talk to me about things before they were ready to talk to their parents about them. And so the concepts that came out of it spell out the word connection, like the first letter spells that out. So here's what they are. I'll verbalize them. It'll also give you a chance to like kind of see which one's popping up for you right now, Amy. So we have create a safe place, observe, non judgment, nod and smile, explore, challenge your truths or curiosity, take your time, innovate, own your own story, and nurture. And by the way, if you'd like a copy of these, they're available for free download on our website at parenttweenconnection.com. There's a button literally right there. You can print it out and like paste it on the mirror if you want a reminder. But curious, Amy, what's popping up for you?
I think they're really good. I remember you gave me this list and I was looking at them and I think they're really good. I think that, um, like many things like this, it's so easy to see this stuff in hindsight and when with distance, which is what we're talking about today, like the advantage that distance gives you, right?
Mm-hmm,
Um, when you're in the thick of the forest,
mm-hmm,
it's very hard to implement any of these,
mm-hmm,
right? It's very hard to implement any of these.
mm-hmm.
But owning your own story, I think, is very helpful for teenagers. It's also something that we parents don't actually sometimes want to do, right? We don't want to admit that we maybe were not perfect when we were teenagers and teenagers. I once had an experience with one of our teenagers, and as this situation was unfolding, I remembered being in that space. It was really unnerving. It was like an out of body experience. I was like, "Oh my gosh, I was a little twerp. I didn't realize until this exact moment." So, I mean, I would say owning your own story. There are times when that's complicated, right? But it can be really
Mhm.
helpful and supportive and identifying with kids. They don't believe us a lot of the times,
Sure.
right? I want to
Yeah.
honor that, right? Like it's easier for kids to believe, young adults to believe things from strangers because they have a perception of us that they're holding on to from their childhood also, like the same way we're treating them as kids, they're thinking of us as the parent who puts the band-aid on at the same time.
Mhm.
Um,
Awesome.
so and the safe space also I think is
Mhm.
really good. And I would connecting, right, allowing kids a space to be themselves and like a
Mhm.
safe space as a parent is almost kind of knowing that you want your kids to know that you've got their back as a
Right.
teenager, if that makes any sense. You're not always going to necessarily agree with them, but you're going to
Mhm.
help them through it, right?
Right.
So if they skip school and get caught and have detention, you're not going to get them out of the detention. You're just not going to hate them because they did it. You're still going to love
Right.
them and help them through it. Right? It's like, hey, you screwed this up. This is a part of life. None of us are perfect. You got to go fix it. Right?
Mhm.
Like these are the things you got to do. So,
Sure.
your dinner will be in the fridge when you get home. Right?
Right.
Like, so the safe space and the safe space shifts from
Sure.
toddler, young kid to adolescent because it's different when a kid skins their knee and, when they get in trouble for texting inappropriate things. Like,
Right. Or, I
yeah.
mean, I know plenty of parents who've navigated things, including arrests
Yep.
and, results of sexual activity and things like
Yep.
that. And I like the distinction that you made of like, or the word, the way I put it often is the being versus the doing. I still
Yeah.
love you, even if your behavior has
Yeah.
been such that there's been a problem. I love you no matter what your behavior is, I think is
Yeah.
the underpinning of that safe place. So
Yeah.
awesome.
Separating the action from the person. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
All right, friends, we're going to wrap up this portion of our conversation. For folks who are members of Parent Tween Village, Amy is going to offer us a little bit more of her time today, and we are going to take 3 points that she wants to offer about how to navigate the actual blending process. She told me she's got 10 tips that she
I
kind of
do.
lives by. So we're not going to cover all 10 of them, but we're going to pick like 2 or 3, whatever we can have a good conversation about over in Parent Tween Village. So if you're watching this 6 months from now or 2026 or sometime down the road and you want to get more information, again, you can find her on Instagram, Amy Says So. Your website is also amysaysso.com, right?
That's right. That's right.
Um,
That's right. I do the best job keeping the website up to date.
okay,
That's the best place to find the most up
awesome.
to date stuff.
Awesome. And Parent Tween Village, these all of these interviews and recordings will live there forever. So even if it's sometime down the road and you want to check her out, come on over. We'll glad to have you join us. So Amy, thank you, and I will see you in just a minute. So stand by.